Since my son woke up after falling into the water, he has become a different person. He suddenly became arrogant and skilled in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, instantly becoming talented. But I know that is not my son. He could possibly be an ancient man who died thousands of years ago and has been reincarnated in my son's body. And he has peacefully accepted his position, family, and friends. Everyone around is surprised and happy with the boy's talent, but I just want my real son to come back. Looking at my son lying on the hospital bed, I hesitantly spoke. There is a girl who was saved by my son and her family is outside. They want to personally come in and thank my son. Does he want to meet them? A hint of disgust appeared in James' eyes, and he angrily refused. As if realizing his harsh tone, he quickly changed his tone. He was tired and didn't want to meet outsiders. And he asked me to go out and send them away. I pretended not to notice the flaw in his words, my face unchanged, and I smiled back. But the next second after I closed the hospital room door, I couldn't help but sit on the floor and silently cry, my eyes filled with resentment. My James is a good-natured boy, how could he hate others? Moreover, is there any mother who doesn't notice even the slightest change in her child? As soon as James woke up in the hospital room, I realized that he was no longer my son. Now, in the hospital room, there is a lonely ghost that I don't know where it came from. It has taken over my son's body. After calming my emotions, I found a place without people and used my mobile phone to call and report to the hospital's supervision room. I secretly hired a surveillance camera installer before when I noticed something was wrong with my son. This allowed me to conveniently observe the actions of the imposter. But what the imposter said after I left the room through a surveillance camera made me itch with anger and hatred. The imposter was talking to himself in the mirror in the hospital room. He unexpectedly revealed that he had the opportunity to start a new life. He even insulted my son, saying that he was a stupid fool because my son died while saving that mischievous girl, helping him to live again with a complete body. His tone was arrogant. Through the camera screen, I could hear him comforting himself in the mirror, assuring himself that from now on, he would replace my son and accept everything the boy had. He was confident in dealing with me, believing that he was much better than my son, so he thought I would soon forget my real son. My fist was clenched so tightly that my nails almost pierced my flesh. I wanted to rush into the hospital room and tear apart the face of this imposter immediately. But I couldn't. I still had to endure that. In a moment of uncontrollable impulse, my finger accidentally touched the screen, and the surveillance screen instantly switched to the time of last night. Just as I was about to press the screen to return to the present, I discovered that while the imposter was sound asleep in the surveillance camera, a look of pain suddenly appeared on his face, his mouth opening and closing unconsciously. I leaned closer to the camera screen and heard my son's plea for help. He kept saying he was in pain and begging for my assistance. At that moment, I was certain that it was my son James. He was still alive, but the imposter mostly controlled his body. He could only come out and breathe when the imposter was fast asleep. Wipe away the tears that I don't know when they started falling. I am determined to save my son. What I have to do now is find a way to deal with this imposter in front of me. During this time, I have hidden myself very well in front of this imposter. He has no idea that he has exposed his true identity when he is alone. This imposter has no memories of James, so he knows nothing about modern technology. However, it seems that he has a disdain for women and thinks that women are foolish, so he has no intention of hiding his abnormalities. Therefore, I easily discovered his clear origin, an old man who has long been dead, with a greedy and arrogant personality. But that's also for the best. I can easily catch every move he makes. I see the imposter approaching me with an impatient face. I remember a psychiatrist saying, if one of the two personalities willingly gives up themselves, then that personality will disappear. Although my son's situation is not as severe, it is almost the same, so the solution is similar. Just make him desperate enough to give up James' body. This method isn't difficult to say, but not simple. Whenever he realizes that something is wrong in this process, before I can find a solution, I am afraid he will take my son with him to die. But it's okay, I won't let things happen that way. From now on, I will create a realistic version of hell on earth for him, and step by step make him think that he has fallen into a deep abyss. I bring the imposter directly to the house that I have prepared in advance. The house is big and bright, but I have set up many cameras inside. A very beautiful girl bows respectfully to me. I notice the imposter's eyes light up, with greed and desire in his eyes. When he didn't pay attention, Jessica glanced at me. I nodded to confirm. I found Jessica in a group of famous actors. She was beautiful, youthful, and ambitious. At that time, I told Jessica that I only had one request, which was to destroy the fake personality without harming my son's body. Of course, I will pay her handsomely. Jessica smiled at me, her bright red lipstick making her look particularly attractive. She was experienced in flirting, so she felt confident in taking on the task I assigned to her. The imposter quickly took the bait. Yes, once he gained power and wealth, he became arrogant and extremely desirous of women. And Jessica knew how to deal with this type of man, so he quickly became obsessed with her. Therefore, the imposter in front of me begged me that he was determined to marry Jessica. I deliberately kept a serious face and tried to show seriousness. I asked him if he knew what Jessica had done to him before. Why did he still want to marry her? The imposter pretended not to care. He replied that it was not a big deal, and he didn't care. Jessica and I had discussed this before. The imposter only cared about death, and he didn't use his brain to think about anything else. He was the type of person who liked beautiful women but was not liked by them. But when that woman easily became his girlfriend, even though he didn't say it, he gradually felt disgusted. But I was also reassured. Today I had an excuse to kick him out, making him stay in this camera-filled house. I still maintain my anger on my face and sternly accuse him. If he dares to follow that woman, he will never come back to me again. Someone like me doesn't care about a disobedient son. He disguises himself with a cold smile. And so I began the process of locking him in a novel and brainwashed him deeply. He feels like he can travel through the past to the present, so he thinks he is also the protagonist. Therefore, he confidently declares to me that he will not come back. Until now, my son has been raised by me, and I take care of all the expenses. So, I can make that imposter poor for the rest of his life. The final solution to this problem is for the imposter to follow Jessica. Of course, I won't take away the house full of cameras that they live in. But this also creates unnecessary illusions for him. He will think I am still angry, and he just has to wait until the anger subsides. Then I will naturally cry and beg him to come back. Because of this, the imposter cannot leave this house too far. He even uses my name as a disguise. For a few days, he takes advantage of this air title to go out. Of course, he relies on my shadow. Anyway, only those who have seen the scenery on the mountaintop can understand the pain of suddenly falling to the bottom. But recently, the imposter has caused too much fame, so my husband in name only, Kevin, has come to the door. He thinks if his son could have become so talented and outstanding, so why am I so angry with his son like this? Kevin wants me to restrain myself and ask James to come back. My face showed a cold expression. Even though I knew Kevin didn't care about James, he also didn't believe that James had changed so much that he was no longer himself. Kevin saw that I didn't want to listen, so he reluctantly gave up trying to persuade me. He didn't affirm that James was his son, so he couldn't be ordinary, he had to be outstanding. Kevin only wanted a talented son, he didn't care who it was. My heart was filled with anger, and I replied coldly. If Kevin said anything nonsense again, I would kick him out of my house. What is excellence? My James is kind, polite, and understanding. He only likes to travel to wonderful places. But just because of that does not bring benefits to this family, so can't he be called excellent? Ignoring Kevin standing there hesitantly, I warned him not to interfere in James' affairs. If I found out that he dared to secretly help him behind my back, Kevin wouldn't want to know what I would do. Intimidated by me, Kevin's face turned pale. I didn't care how he cursed me in his heart. As long as he didn't dare to object, I considered it his agreement. Furthermore, I am currently very busy. My plan has been set, just waiting for the right time to succeed. I left the house and prepared to get in the car. A figure rushed to my feet. Looking down, I saw a cute little girl holding onto my leg. She is my little neighbor, Olivia, the girl who was saved by James when she fell into the water. She saw me looking down and immediately smiled. Olivia asked me when she could meet James again. She said she missed my son. I was startled and gently patted her head. Wasn't this girl just recently met James? A few days ago, Olivia saw the imposter. Olivia clearly remembered the scene from that day. Her face wrinkled, muttering to herself, accusing me of lying, that it wasn't James. Olivia affirmed that James had a beautiful and warm smile, so the guy that day was definitely not James as she knew him. The little girl, wise beyond her years, said, "But he and James look alike." So the little girl sympathized with me because I was confused and didn't realize that. She sighed and said that James was surely angry because of this, so he hadn't come home for a few days. Olivia instructed me to comfort the real James when he returned. My eyes turned red, surprised that a little girl like Olivia could sense that something was wrong with my son. Indeed, children are the most sensitive beings. How could she not feel that the neighbor that she liked had changed so much? So what right did the imposter have to enjoy the love that others had for James? I sat down and looked straight into Olivia's eyes, reassuring her that I would bring her brother James back soon. I promised. The imposter has recently been attracting attention, but the people supporting him are here because of my reputation for turning stones into gold in the pearl industry. Most of them believe that if they want to please me, it's difficult, but to please my son, it's easy. Otherwise, who else could be attracted to his little knowledge and talents? Although it's true that very few modern people can play the piano, chess, calligraphy, and even painting, in this advanced information age, just because you don't know doesn't mean you appreciate it. If it were only him, he wouldn't be able to help everyone have a comfortable and fulfilling life. How could he deceive that group of people when he hadn't even learned how to make money in this era? Therefore, under my post on the web, those who originally wanted to please me have become smart, immediately after receiving the news of the impersonation wanting to sever the relationship between the two of us. They all want to cut off contact with him immediately. Fortunately, he is too ignorant, ignoring those people and not caring about the reasons. Worse, those people think that they have invested a lot of time and money in this impersonation but have gained nothing, so they come to confront the impersonator to demand it back. The impersonator is now silent. He immediately gets angry and wants to seek help. There is no reason to return a gift that has been given, just like wanting him to return all the money they spent in a relationship after breaking up, right? Although the impersonator is also the type of person who wants to recover the money spent on a woman after breaking up, the impersonator is shameless and has double standards. How can he allow others to treat him like that? Therefore, he definitely disagrees. But now, the news of his ingratitude towards me has been known to everyone. What is the impersonator if not for me to protect him from behind? With such shamelessness, most people ignore it. But if they know that the impersonator has no one who cares and helps him, they will use all dirty and foul means to reclaim the gifts they gave. When reclaiming the gifts, they push the impersonator to the ground and spit on him. They used to hear that my beloved child was very capable and filial. But today they see him like this. He is no different from beggars who only know how to beg when they don't have anyone to rely on. This is a deadly blow, hitting the mind of the impersonator. What he despises the most is the character of James Truly. He feels that if he doesn't have a good background, if he doesn't have someone to protect him until death, how can he live happily like this? That imposter was inherently bad-tempered, so he also felt that James was just pretending when James almost died trying to save others. How could he bear it when he heard others compare him unfavorably to James? But deep down, no matter how angry and incompetent he was, he couldn't prevent the situation from getting worse. He was almost out of money because he left home. Jessica followed him, also troubled. Due to the imposter arguing with me, he didn't receive any money from me. Jessica pretended to be gentle and moved forward. She said, "The rent and utilities for the villa are too expensive. If they can't pay next month, it's very likely that the government will cut off water, electricity, and internet. Now they have almost run out of food in the villa. If they continue like this, they might not even have a place to eat or stay." He sneered, obviously not thinking about having to pay for water, electricity, and internet. He didn't know much about modern times. He thought it was like ancient times, where everything was a gift from nature, and he didn't expect to have to pay for it. He felt foolish for leaving for me in a difficult way, and not bringing anything with him. Because he didn't have James' memories, he didn't even know the passwords for the banking app and social media accounts on his mobile phone. Now he really didn't know what to do. Jessica silently cursed the poor man in her heart, but she subtly reminded him that James still had some money saved over the years, so he should use that money. The imposter was suddenly moved. He held Jessica's hand and promised her that no matter how many women pursued him, he only loved Jessica, so she could rest assured when she was with him. Finally, the imposter couldn't figure out where to hide his savings. Because he didn't want to reveal the secret, he could only come to me to beg. When I saw the imposter pretending to ask me for money, I didn't feel guilty but rather felt happy. The imposter didn't notice my dark side. Instead, he acted arrogant. He told me to forget about the past. Hearing that, I looked straight into his eyes and smirked. I asked him if he was willing to give up that woman to come back home. The imposter's face showed hesitation and a bit of doubt. Afraid of the plan going wrong, Jessica quickly pretended to stumble and cry like a weak young girl. The imposter immediately forgot his previous hesitation and worriedly rushed to comfort Jessica. His face clearly showed anger. He asked me why I targeted Jessica. Hearing that, I laughed triumphantly and threatened that as long as he was still in the country, I would send someone to follow him and Jessica. Immediately, the imposter forced himself to say that he would leave the country to live. At first, he felt a little regret, but when he saw my confused face, he quickly dismissed that regret and started feeling proud of it. He even believed that, after all, that house is his. He would sell it and take Jessica abroad immediately. I challenged him to do it. Although I pretended to be angry on the surface, in reality, I was adding fuel to the fire. I slammed the glass down on the table and said with hidden threats that if he dared to do that, I would no longer acknowledge him as my son. He held Jessica's hand and angrily left without caring about my anger. As for me, I watched their backs as they left and smiled. Finally, he has chosen to leave the country just as I wanted. Despite using my son's body, I cannot let him ruin James' reputation in the country. Now that he has gone abroad, I have more ways to deal with him. And when that time comes, Jessica can also leave. As soon as he returned, the imposter wanted to sell the house. Because he didn't know how to sell it, he handed this task to Jessica. She came to me and transferred the villa to me at a low price. But the imposter didn't know that the current price was much higher than before. So, the villa worth over $1,300,000 was sold for just over $130,000. Seeing so much money, the imposter was very happy. On the day of departure, he took Jessica to the airport gate early. But not long after, there was an incident with him. It turned out that when he boarded the plane, the imposter wanted to use the restroom, so he accidentally pulled the red handle on the emergency exit door, causing the inflatable slide of the plane to deploy immediately after. Under the pale face of the flight attendant, he had no choice but to desperately pay the fine, and immediately a portion of his money disappeared. Luckily, Jessica was standing far away from him, otherwise, she would have been extremely embarrassed. Jessica's voice on the other end of the phone was full of joy, and then she couldn't help but complain. But how could there be someone so foolish? She asked me if the imposter went online. If he has, why didn't he even know about this? Is he from ancient times? I gently replied, it's possible. After all, he used to be an ancient person, not knowing many things, even though he learned a little later. But I know that from now on, before I can take action, this imposter will still encounter many troubles. At 6 o'clock in the afternoon, imposter and Jessica just got off the plane. While Jessica went to the restroom, imposter turned around and accidentally bumped into a beautiful black woman. The woman, tall, seductive, and attractive, blew a kiss and invited him to meet her in the nearby alley. Imposter's womanizing heart felt revived and he followed her. So when Jessica returned, she saw the imposter stripped naked, with only his underwear on, waiting for her in a small alley, with teary eyes. Clearly filled with disgust, but still trying to save him with a loving face. But when the woman saw his ugly face, the imposter also felt a bit ashamed. Therefore, afterward, he was not cold or indifferent to Jessica. Thanks to that, Jessica gradually truly understood the character of that man. In just a few days, she made the imposter listen to her more. The remaining $115,000 in their savings was also spent lavishly by him under Jessica's sweet words. Finally, under my guidance, Jessica took him to the casino when he was almost out of money. I had discussed it beforehand with the casino owner and asked them to let him taste a bit of the sweetness of life. So at first, he won a lot of money, the jealous eyes of the gamblers around, and the constant flow of money into his pocket were the best catalysts to ignite his greed. He became obsessed with gambling, and he didn't realize that Jessica, who had brought him in, had disappeared at some point. Owning a huge amount of money in just a few short hours could make anyone feel uneasy. And he quickly became addicted to this pleasure. In the final game, the imposter was left with only one opponent on the table. The ease of owning a huge amount of money made him completely lose his mind. He became even more intense after being challenged by his opponent. If he bets all his chips plus himself, would the imposter dare to follow him? The jubilant imposter puts all his chips in play without any hesitation. All in. While waiting for the dealer to deal cards to his opponent, the imposter looks at the cards in his hand and feels proud that he has surely won. But at this moment, his opponent's cards are also revealed. The imposter suddenly becomes worried. He stands up immediately, almost pushing the wooden chair to the ground. He can't believe that his opponent's cards could be better than his. The smile on his face suddenly fades away. The opponent's bodyguards come forward and push the imposter onto the table. Now the imposter is sober again. He sweats cold, his face turns pale, constantly denying that he has bet his own life. The opponent signals the guards to drag the imposter into the room behind the casino. After everyone around left, except for Joe, the man who won the bet, I walked out from the side door. That man looked at me with respect. I sat in the seat that the imposter had previously occupied and gently asked the man if he knew how to train an unruly dog. Joe is the subordinate that my father left for me. After divorcing my mother, he went abroad to work hard and eventually became a gangster. When he got old, he no longer participated in battles, so he left Joe for me, someone who is very loyal to me. Joe is the one who ruled the territory that my father conquered back then. In fact, even this casino is also left by my father. Returning to the previous question, Joe shook his head and said nothing. I smiled and slowly said, "Give it plenty of punishment and a little bit of sugar." I continued to ask Joe if he knew how to completely destroy a person. He still shook his head. I laughed mischievously. Just when he thought everything was going to get better after going through so much difficulty, we crushed his hope again. I asked Joe to lock the imposter in a small dark room. The body of the imposter was James' body, so naturally, I didn't do anything too harmful to that body. But hunger, darkness, cold, and deep-seated fear can easily drive a person insane. 2 days later, I returned, looking at the trembling imposter, terrified through the one-way mirror. An indescribable joy surged within me. Occasionally, I asked Joe's guards to throw some leftover food into the room. Then I starved him for another 2 days. I repeated this constantly for half a month, and the imposter's body began to weaken. He groaned and begged for release. Knowing the time had come, I immediately asked the famous priest in the area to come and expel the old soul. Expelling the soul and releasing him can only be accomplished when the soul itself wants to be released. After the priest finished expelling the soul, James finally returned to his own body. The ambulance waiting outside the casino took him to the nearest hospital. A week later, after receiving saline and proper nutrition, James finally recovered. But he was extremely afraid of places with a lot of water like lakes, rivers, or the sea. Because I didn't want my son to be possessed by wandering souls down there, I accepted that. Fortunately, my son is still innocently playing with the neighbor girl, Olivia. He even joined the youth volunteer team at school to help disadvantaged families. And I am happy about that. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have any comments, please leave them below. I will read and reply. I create long ghost stories that are real with high-quality audio. Because I believe these stories will help you enhance your life experience and thinking ability.